Okay. Our final two speakers for the afternoon, we are so privileged and honored that we have such incredible activists with us. Activism has been one of the hallmarks of the past 2 months in this country, and the bravery to stand up sometimes when you are doing that all alone, and that these two individuals have done that work, and we have a lot to learn, not only in this community, but also within Canada and on the international stage. We have two incredible speakers. I'm going to bring them both up. The first is Craig Benjamin. Craig Benjamin is the campaigner for the human rights of Indigenous peoples with Amnesty International. Craig's worked with many Indigenous activists in a wide range of struggles for the protection of human rights. He represents Amnesty International during the final stage of a deliberation over the Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples at the United Nations. And so we are very pleased to have Craig. Please welcome Craig to the stage over here.
It's a real honor to be here today, and I want to acknowledge the honor of speaking today from the traditional Algonquin territory, and the honor I've had to live in this territory now for many years. And it is especially an honor to be able to speak at an event where so many people I deeply admire have spoken to you so forcefully, so powerfully, and to be surrounded by so many others who I know that your work is making a profound difference in communities across the country. We've heard today, such a clear and strong rebuttal of the Prime Minister's claim that this country has no colonial history. We have heard as well a clear statement, we struggle today with a colonial present. And I think we have been given the direction, each one of us, that it's our responsibility to ensure that our children, our grandchildren, don't inherit a colonial future. Victoria Freeman said that, when we look at dismantling colonialism as a structure, as a system, we know that the government will be the last to concede, that we'll bring them kicking and screaming into the process of decolonization. But there's a lot that each and every one of us can do. And there's amazing resources out there that provide guidance to us as individuals about the ethics of the practice of being a good ally, of working together toward this end. I noticed that on the Facebook site for this event, Dr. Leanne excellent Bill of Responsibilities for Allies is posted. I would really encourage people to look at it because it expresses, I think, certainly some of the standards and the ethics that I've seen among colleagues that I think represent the positive practice. I think it articulates them far better than I ever could. But in particular, I wanted to emphasize one point that is made over and over again through that, which is the importance of critical thinking. Because there's just no doubt that we grow up with, we are surrounded with, and we are inundated every day with propaganda that tries to downplay, tries to hide, tries to cover up the very nature and workings of this colonial system. And our best tool in addressing that is always that of critical thinking. I want to give a particular example because Andrew was talking about the importance of the international system and the power that comes from using that international system. At the desk, there are copies of the UN Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. And if you don't have a copy yourself, please do take them in to be taken away. And if we run out, let me know and I'll make sure you can get a copy at a later date. The Declaration is the product of more than 2 decades of struggle by Indigenous peoples around the world to have their voices heard in the United Nations. And they succeeded. It's not a perfect instrument, but it is a powerful instrument. And it's the first international human rights instrument where the rights holders themselves were direct partners in the drafting of each and every provision. It was an extraordinary accomplishment. It was an accomplishment that was achieved despite the fact that any number of experts with long experience in the United Nations system said that it couldn't be done. But it was achieved anyway. But and many people will know that when the Declaration was adopted more than 5 years ago, in 2007, Canada was one of only 4 nations to vote against the adoption of the Declaration. that wasn't all that Canada did. Canada actually led an attempt to have the Declaration blocked from going forward. And Canada reached out to countries with utterly horrendous records in respect to Indigenous peoples and tried to bring them into an alliance against this Declaration. And they ultimately failed. And when the vote went through and the Declaration was adopted, there was a story that appeared and the next day. The title was "Tories Defend No in Native Rights Vote." And the story begins, "The rights of non-Native Canadians would have been threatened had the government not opposed the Indigenous Rights Declaration the United Nations overwhelmingly approved yesterday," Indian Affairs Minister Chuck Strahl said. The article goes on to directly quote Chuck Strahl, who was minister at the time, by saying, "By signing on to this international human rights instrument, by signing on, you default to the document saying that the only rights are the rights of First Nations. And of course in Canada, that's inconsistent with our Constitution." Absolutely shame. That is, first of all, utterly wrong, and anyone who reads the Declaration will see that it's wrong. But it's wrong at a deeper level than the words and the facts of the instrument. It's wrong at a level that claim that the advancement, the recognition of the rights of Indigenous peoples is a threat to non-Indigenous peoples is an offense to the very concept of human rights. Human rights is not and is never a zero-sum game. And I think of the words that began the day today when Albert Dumont talked about the fact that when Canada stole the lands of Indigenous peoples, there may have been material gain, but there was spiritual loss. And that to me resonates with one of the central concepts that I've always believed in as a human rights activist, as one which goes to the heart of all of these instruments. It goes to the reason we adopt and promote these instruments, and that is promotion of the human rights of everyone benefits everyone. And the violation of human rights in every instance diminishes us all. And for us as a nation, as a country, to accept, to turn our back on persistent, decade after decade after decade of grave and systematic violation of the rights of Indigenous peoples, without a doubt diminishes Canada as a country and diminishes us as citizens in that country. And instruments like the Declaration give us another way. We began the day talking about the need to build respectful and reciprocal relationships. And when you look at international human rights standards like the Declaration, you see again and again, talk about collaboration, talked about mutual agreement. This is a declaration that has strong provisions for the respect of the land rights of Indigenous peoples, respect for that right of free, prior, and informed consent. But again and again, it emphasizes that achieving that respect, achieving that protection, benefits us all. And I think that when talking about changing the language, I think we need to shift to that language where we recognize that advocating for, standing up alongside Indigenous peoples in the defense of their rights is simply good for us all. And I want to maybe briefly give you a couple of examples. I already talked about the achievement of the Declaration itself. And this was the adoption of the Declaration was an extraordinary victory of the international Indigenous peoples movement, a victory of people representing their own rights on the international stage, but also clearly demonstrating their expertise in the articulation of those rights. And it was a struggle in which non-Indigenous peoples organizations played a very specific role, and that role is one of holding our own governments to account, holding them to account for when they stood up in the United Nations and tried to oppose the Declaration, to say to them, you can't do that in our name. And I think that element of accountability is crucial. Andrew mentioned the right of free, prior, and informed consent, which is central to the Declaration. The right of Indigenous peoples to make their own decision what's best for their lands, for their communities, for their lives, for their children, is so fundamental to the principle of self-determination and runs right through the Declaration. And this is when Canada actually talks about the substance of its opposition to the Declaration. Canada still today talks about free, prior, and informed consent and the unacceptability of free, prior, and informed consent, that it's excessive, that it is threatening to the rights of non-Indigenous people. We have a long struggle ahead of us to convince the Government of Canada to accept the right of free, prior, and informed consent. But we can still make progress, and there's such an extraordinary achievement, and others in this room will know the story better than me. And I know, for example, Dr. Leanne Simpson has worked really closely with the people of Grassy Narrows. But just very quickly, people of Grassy Narrows in northwestern Ontario did an extraordinary thing. They're now in 10 years of a blockade against industrial logging on their land. And they've carried out their campaign for the right to their own forest, to their own land, in so many fora, in so many ways. But one of the ways that they did this, when the province of Ontario was utterly refusing to stop licensing logging on their lands, is that they collaborated with organizations like the Rainforest Action Network and Forest Ethics and others, and they went after every company involved in the chain of processing the wood from their land. And eventually, they so thoroughly embarrassed Boise Cascade that was selling a green labeled paper that was 100% sourced in Grassy Narrows, that Boise Cascade, in the midst of an International Day of Action, actually publicly stated that they would no longer purchase paper that was, a pulp for their paper that was sourced from Grassy Narrows until the community gave its consent. So a right set out in an international human rights instrument, a right that governments in Canada would not respect. We see a First Nation nonetheless achieving the real respect and enforcement of that right, because as soon as that one buyer pulled out, the whole chain fell apart and industrial logging came to a halt. Despite the best efforts of the province to have that logging resumed. So again, it goes to, I think, the power of actions that all of us can take and be involved in that really can start dismantling that relationship of colonialism and ensure that we are not passing it on to a future generation. Thank you.
I can't think of a more brilliant and sharper way an inspiring way to end our multitude of sessions in this continuing work. We have a question for both of you or one of you, or please just address your name first and then address it over here. So.
Okay, I'm going to give you a little bit of background, but the question is, I do actually have a question, is, how best do we actually build, somebody talked about this healthy marriage. And but I want to speak clearly that there's two things that really I'm standing here representing. And first is, I come from a small country called Malta, and my parents immigrated, and it is a incredibly oppressed place that was oppressed for thousands of years. So until 1964, they were forced to teach English in the schools, and until there was independence. So I think the biggest thing I want to say about that is that what I really hope will be part of our rebuilding our relationships is the opportunity to tell our stories. Not all of us come here as superior people. I was, only knew my parents to be very oppressed. So, first of all, we're not all anything. We're all very unique human beings. The second part is that I come here as part of the Canadian Peace Initiative, which fundamentally we want a Department of Peace in Canada, and we also want a culture of peace to be built within Canada as being a major principle. But generally, fundamentally, what we're trying to do is reimagine our relationships in our homes, in our communities, with the diverse peoples of Canada, because we know that it is sick. We have a very sick place. Our country is not is not the way that we would like it to be for anybody. So given that, that's what drives me to be part of this, and the question is, how do we really sit down and talk about these things? Because I believe a lot of the basis of racism that I hear from people are from the most oppressed Canadians. They can't afford to be generous, and that's a major issue in Canada.
I think one of the things that is most integral in redefining this relationship is obviously education and open dialogue. But one thing that I found substantial in regards to the rallies and the teach-ins and all the events that are circulating around the concept of creating change is ceremony. So whether you're in a group of 60 people or you're in a group of 8,000 people, ceremony is number one in holding us together and keeping us grounded. Whether it's knowledge of our traditional teachings or whether it's knowledge from another individual and their teachings. That's what the prophecy came down to. The prophecy is living, it's breathing, and it's providing us to move forward in a healthy and meaningful relationship. And I think by the combination of education, the combination of open dialogue, and the combination of remembering that this is prophecy, it'll really allow us to redefine our relationship, to build a healthy, meaningful relationship that'll be beneficial for our future generations.
I think it's really worthwhile to always remember that the change can be achieved at often at a very personal level, and often has to start there. And we can get caught up with the largeness of what we're confronted with, and get caught up with the complexity of the laws. And quite often the change comes down to something more simple and more direct. And I want to mention an amazing movement that began right here with a woman from Kittigan-Zibi, Bridget Tolley, who came forward 10 years ago with an idea to hold a vigil to honor her own mother and other women, Aboriginal women who have been murdered, who have gone missing, and to demonstrate that these are women who are loved and valued. And that initial idea of a vigil got taken up and propelled forward by the Native Women's Association of Canada, by groups like Kairos, and became the basis of a phenomenal movement of families. And I understand that last year there were more than 175 such vigils across the country, emphasizing a really basic message of the value of Aboriginal women's lives. And it really began with a single person's initiative to honor their own mother. And I think that we have to bear in mind how much can be achieved through that basic desire to show respect for another person.
Okay, so we're going to go with 3, so that all of you just please be very brief in your comments, only because we have a whole set of things we've got left. Oh wait, we just had more people up there. Oh, there. Okay, it's unity. Okay, perfect. Okay, wonderful. So you could sit down if you want. I will drop on you, but we've got basically these 3 left. Okay, so we'll start here. Okay, and then there, and then the group. The group of cookums, as always, and with the grandmothers. That's always the way to go. Yeah. Okay. Go ahead over there.
My name is Mary Moore. That's the name of my assimilation. I don't know my other or how to speak my language. I was born on a reservation. I was then scooped from my reservation. I was raised in a white family. And because of this, I don't know where to begin. I believe that because of my unique status, I have a voice in both the settler camp and the native camp. However, there is a barrier. I've been shut out of conversations because I've been called, excuse the term, an apple. I've been shut out of conversations because I look like this. There's a very large crack in the unity and the conversations through which a lot of us have fallen. There are thousands of us.
I'm another one of those thousands. I am 2 generations away from this. This is the face of assimilation. I have been told I am not white and I can never be loved by anyone white. That's what I was raised. That's what my mother told me. She told me she'd never be able to wash the filth out of me. I've also been told by Niigaan on their land that I am not Niigaan because I was not raised there. I cannot be Niigaan because I do not have an attachment to the land. I wasn't raised there. I have been told by Ojibwe that I am not Ojibwe and can never be Ojibwe because I have never grown up on that land. I've grown up here. There are thousands of us, fallen feathers, featherbloods. These are 2 of the terms that we're using. We have been told by both sides of this conflict box that we don't belong. I don't see a conflict box. I see people. Can you see me? Can you see us?
I want to say miigwech for sharing your stories. One thing that remains vital in this circumstance is Creator knows. Doesn't matter what legislation says. Doesn't matter what people and communities say. Because you know in your heart who you are and where you come from. The Creator knows in your heart and in your mind and in your spirit who you are and where you come from. And that's integral to who we are as Indigenous peoples. Self-identity. That's what's important. Forget the politics. Ceremony surpasses politics in all occasions. And the Creator is here for you. Miigwech.
Craig Benjamin. Craig Benjamin is the campaigner for the human rights of Indigenous peoples with Amnesty International. Craig's worked with many Indigenous activists in a wide range of struggles for the protection of human rights. He represents Amnesty International during the final stage of a deliberation over the Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples at the United Nations. And so we are very pleased to have Craig. Please welcome Craig to the stage over here. Okay. Our final 2 speakers for the afternoon, we are so privileged and honored that we have such incredible activists with us. Activism has been one of the hallmarks of the past 2 months in this country, and the bravery to stand up sometimes when you are doing that all alone, and that these 2 individuals have done that work, and we have a lot to learn, not only in this community, but also within Canada and on the international stage. We have 2 incredible speakers. I'm going to bring them both up. The first is
Clear and strong rebuttal of the Prime Minister's claim that this country has no colonial history. We have heard as well the clear statement, we struggle today with a colonial present. And I think we have been given the direction, each one of us, that it's our responsibility to ensure that our children, our grandchildren, don't inherit a colonial future. Victoria Freeman said that, when we look at dismantling colonialism as a structure, as a system, we know that the government will be the real honor to be here today, and I want to acknowledge the honor of speaking today from the traditional Algonquin territory, and the honor I've had to live in this territory now for many years. And it is especially an honor to be able to speak at an event where so many people I deeply admire have spoken to you so forcefully, so powerfully, and to be surrounded by so many others who I know that your work is making a profound difference in communities across the country. We've heard today, such a clear last to concede, that we'll bring them kicking and screaming into the process of decolonization. But there's a lot that each and every one of us can do. And there's amazing resources out there that provide guidance to us as individuals about the ethics of the practice of being a good ally, of working together toward this end. I noticed that on the Facebook site for this event, Dr. Leanne Gell's excellent Bill of Responsibilities for Allies is posted. I would really encourage people to look at it because it